Hello and welcome to the first Grindhouse Performance Engineering subscriber Q&A session. I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoy this video. Stay tuned. There's literally a pile of boxes just sitting here. Serious. Well, everything that's under it looks worse. So the first question's from Stoyan. He said, love the content, keep this going, man. How's the Motor Trend series feel? That's cool. That's cool. For my question, how did you decide to start YouTubing? That's a great question. For me, there are so many memories of when I was a kid, watching TV religiously of all these different people building these crazy cars or these crazy projects, and I was glued to the screen the whole time. Every second of any show that was on that had to do with cars, I was watching it, I was obsessing over it, and to me, YouTube is that opportunity for the next generation. YouTube has so many different possibilities for people to really reach out to the world and tell them their story or show them something or teach them something or really do some really powerful things that you see like bigger channels do. And to have any part of that would be really meaningful to me. I don't do things really for myself. And the idea of starting the channel to show people everything I go through, all the projects, the type of work that I'm doing, all of that changes when I'm doing it for you. The next question's from SwimDog20, and he asks, where is the best place to buy a 280Z project car and how much should I pay for one? I'm gonna be a little bit political with this answer because it super depends on each individual person, what their skill sets are, what they want their project to be, and how much of a total budget that they have in mind, right? For me, I'm really fortunate. I've got my truck, I've got my trailer. I don't care if a car runs or not, if it's right for me and right for my project. That gives me a lot of advantage. And that also means that I can pick a lot of things up that not everyone necessarily can. If someone's a purist and they want the original engine, the original transmission, all the original parts, whatever, they're gonna be paying for that. Don't put yourself in a position where you have to pay for that if you don't really care about that. It sounds obvious saying out loud, but I see people do it all the time where they'll get this beautiful, pristine car and then completely tear it apart and then, sell half the parts off of it just because it's not what they wanted. It's pretty hard to answer a question like how much should you pay, because it really depends on what your goals are to have as an end result and what your goals are, what your capabilities are as a mechanic, as a fabricator, and really what you really want to do with the car. Are you willing to try to paint the car yourself? Are you willing to do rust repair work? Rust repair work's really unpleasant. Do you want to get involved with that if you don't have to? You're going to get involved with it no matter what on an old Datsun because that's what they are. But, my point is, if you know that you want to swap the engine, if you know that you have certain plans in mind that you want to do, try to find a project that suits your specific goals of what your end result will be rather than on the front end. So my next question's from Kenneth Raff, and he asked, Differential, what gear ratio will you be using? So I've got an R200 from an R33 Nissan GTR, and it's got a 411 rear gear. He followed up, how important is it to get a fuel cell over modifying the original tank? That's a good question. It really depends what you're planning on doing for the car. If you're gonna be going on the track, I would say, a fuel cell is gonna be way safer. I would say another big benefit of the fuel cell is it's gonna be a lot more sterile. The original fuel tanks are not easy to completely clean out. And depending on the car that you bought and the condition of the car that you bought, especially if it's been parked for a long time and it had a fuel tank of fuel in it or varnish in it at this point, if it's in good shape though, and you're not really planning on tracking the car, you're leaving the original engine in, or even if you're gonna swap the engine, I've seen plenty of swap cars that still have an original tank that just have an upgraded fuel pump. You can totally go that route if you're really just cruising around or having some fun with it. But for me, safety is a big deal. I know that the fuel cell is going to be way safer if I happen to get in an accident on the road or on the track. And for me, it was just an obvious choice for me to make, but it's totally up to you. I've seen plenty of people who use the stock tank and get away just fine. And then Kenneth had a third question. What's your thoughts on the anti-gravity batteries? Are they worth the money? I don't have a lot of experience with them. I'll be completely honest. I know some friends who run them in their drift cars or in their race cars, and they seem to do well, but I'm not too familiar with the nuances because I've definitely had to help push start some of them at the same time. The next question comes from Ashley M, and she asked, what's the favorite car you've owned outside of Paprika? I see what you're doing, and it's not gonna work. I'm not. Paprika is not my favorite car by any stretch. I probably have two favorite cars that I've owned, and they're on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. The first one, I had a 1989 Dodge D350 pickup truck. It was a two-wheel drive, long bed. Cummins had the 12-valve 5.9 in it. Absolutely regret selling that truck. At some point, I'm gonna be getting another first generation Cummins pickup or doing some kind of Cummins swap into an old pickup because that truck was super fun and I really do miss it. And then my other one, complete opposite end of the spectrum, I owned a 2002 Ford Crown Victoria LX Sport. I learned so much working on this car. I had a Vortex supercharger on it. The motor was fully built, cams, heads, the whole thing, built block, made like 500 horsepower. It was a riot. It scared people. It scared me. It was not safe, and it was a lot of fun. I really missed that car. So I've gotta say that one as well. That thing was a blast. Ashley had a follow-up question, which was, what's your favorite part of Paprika? I think I know when Ashley M started subscribing to my channel. My favorite part of Paprika, everything's cheap for it. I know when we first started rallycrossing, I told my wife, hey, we're not gonna put a lot of money into this. This is gonna just be some cheap fun. We'll go, if something breaks, we're just gonna retire the car and be done with it. And then, we started racing and it started being a lot of fun. And we needed, new struts. We needed this, we needed that. And parts were really cheap. So to keep it running for 2 years now, we've only spent a couple $100 in parts and we've run every event that we could. So that's cool. To me, that's awesome. My real favorite part that I have to say, it is so cool to watch my wife become a better and more competitive driver every single event that we run. She's gained so much confidence with her driving. She's getting so good at rallycross, and it's cool to be a part of that with her and to do that with her because that's rare, and I really do appreciate that. The next question comes from Poacher in the Zoo, and his question is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to gain this type of skill set? I love this question. This is cool. And the advice that I would give is to have specific goals or projects in mind that will wind up making you more efficient down the road. Build the workbench. Instead of going to, Harbor Freight and buying their workbench, take a picture of it, take some measurements of it, and go buy the materials and build it yourself. The sooner you get in the habit of the thinking, I can solve this problem, rather than I'm gonna buy something that solves my problem, the sooner you'll have the mindset that you can really do anything. And honestly, a lot of stuff you can build, it really won't matter if it's not perfect. If you say, oh, I want to build something that organizes all of the welding rods that I have no idea how to use, it's not going to matter if the welds aren't the greatest, or like a lot of the all the workbenches in this shop I built because I wanted them to be a certain thing, and I didn't want to spend 3 or 4 times the money to buy something pre-built. The sooner you get into that mindset with little things, the sooner everything starts opening up and it becomes more natural for you to grab the TIG torch or grab, the hammers or the saws or whatever it is, that you can make your own solutions. If you're like me, you have to make the most out of the time you have available in the shop to work on your projects. So if your projects are focused on making you more efficient in your workspace, everything downstream will become much smoother. The next question is from Ben Simonoff, and he asked, what has been the hardest part of doing an LS swap? It feels like on a 280Z, it would be the chassis reinforcement, as it wasn't designed for real power. That's a really good question, Ben. But honestly, the deeper you go into these LS engines and the different families and the different generations, is it a truck motor? Is it as an SUV? Is it this generation SUV? Was it out of like an all-wheel drive one or whatever? There are all sorts of secret little nuances that you're not going to be fully aware of until you're neck deep in it. So the advice there is to do the research to figure out exactly which LS engine or which version of an LS engine you want to start with to get to your specific goals in mind. So my last question for today is from Bradley Smith, and he asked, how did you get started with cars and fab? This is another great question. I really feel like with all of these, I probably could have done entire 10-minute episodes just rambling about them, but I'm trying to keep things brief. I don't know. Let me know if that's what you want to see, something a bit longer format. I don't know. I'm just trying this now. But that's a really good question, Bradley. Thank you. I had some friends who were involved in volunteer firefighting, and a lot of the volunteer firefighters had an interest in cars. I don't know, it just kind of comes with that territory for whatever reason. And a lot of these people were into off-roading, and they wanted their volunteer firefighter support vehicles modified in such a way that it would have, CB radios or lights or sound systems or whatever. It was my first real exposure to solving problems myself. I thought it was really cool that, all these different volunteer firefighters would be bringing their cars to my friend's house, and then we would go tear them all apart and upfit, all these different pieces of hardware that would make them more effective as a volunteer firefighter. And then, a lot of these people were also really into off-roading, and all these different activities with cars. So I learned a lot about, wiring, installing audio systems, installing lights, radios, stuff like that. They got into doing lift kits, off-roading activities. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. So that was my first like real exposure to working on cars that really, you know, I was always really enthusiastic since I was a freaking child. But that was my first exposure to working on them. All right, so those are all the questions that we had for today. I really could have gone into a lot more detail on these. So definitely, if that's something you'd be interested in, I could probably do a video on each of these questions, in all honesty. But it's fun to do. I thought it'd be neat, and let me know what you think. All right, guys, have a good day, and I will see you in the next episode.